Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwukta.
This is Merps. This week, we're going to be talking more arena meta. Want to talk to you guys about kind of a surprising class that's been doing really well. But first, we also want to bring you some news from Blizzard.
I want to apologize ahead of time because I am sick, and I may be sick for the next couple of Lightforges, maybe, depending on how long this lasts. So if I cough like this, just know that that's going to happen a few times in this podcast, and fair warning to your ears. I'm coughing away from the mic as far as I can. But this may not be edited out before this goes into podcast form, depending on how much time there is tonight.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. All right. So we will make do and just power through. All right. First, we wanted to talk about new cards coming to, it's coming to the arena, but it's coming to just Hearthstone generally, right? And this isn't new news. Blizzard announced this actually before last week's podcast as well. We want to make sure Boozer had as much time as possible, so we didn't mention it. But as you guys can see, it's not the biggest of news. Essentially, in their post, Blizzard has stated that they are releasing new classic cards in order to help fill the gap left by moving the others to the Hall of Fame, and they want to make sure that these classes have new tools that they can use, very basic tools that they can use in deck construction in the future. So let's go through these cards. It is 2 mage cards, 1 rogue card, and 1 warlock card. So let's look at the 2 mage cards first. The first one is a common card. It's called a Tome of Intellect. It's just 1 mana, add a random mage spell to your hand. Done.
Very simple. These are all very simple cards. So we didn't talk about them before because they're really not very important to either the arena and definitely not to constructed. And they're coming out. Presumably, there's going to be a patch that's going to happen tomorrow, or like tomorrow as in Monday or Tuesday. And these are going to come in and they're going to rebucket everything. And it's going to be a big impact in the arena because they're going to rebucket everything. And we'll probably focus the Lightforge, the next week's Lightforge, on that, assuming that's what they do. But they're also going to add these cards. We just want to make sure you're not like totally confused when you see these new cards and you're like, oh, is this like an arena only event? No, these are just going the basic set. So Tome of Intellect is one of 3 very typical cards that they're adding in this case. Tome of Intellect is going to end up to be a 70. 1 card is being used, and you're paying 1 mana, and you're getting back a random card, which is worse than a normal card that you can pick. So at a 70, it's going to be in the 7th bucket. Oh, we also assume all these cards are in the 7th bucket. So to the extent that they're not, we'll fix them on the Lightforge tier list very quickly.
Yep. Okay, so like Adwukta said, Tome of Intellect, just not a good card. We don't have to go super in-depth on why. Icicle is the other mage card, which is a 2 mana epic spell that says deal 2 damage to a minion. If it's frozen, draw a card. 2 mana for 2 damage, can't go face, but with the upside of drawing a card when it's frozen. So the upside is really good, right? 2 mana, 2 damage, but it's pretty difficult to proc in the arena.
Not only do you have to have a card that freezes stuff, but then it has to freeze the stuff, and then this card has to also not kill it. Like, you see the layers that go in? So it's not like if you have a card that freezes something, you're good. The target frozen has to have more health than the freezing card itself. So if you're frostbolting something, for example, then the target has to have 6 health. And then, like, do you really want to be, like, using 2 cards and a ping on that card? Like, it's just very awkward to trigger this synergy. I think it's Blizzard's way of saying, like, we'll add a token Ice Mage synergy, but it's completely impractical in the arena. You will very rarely trigger it. This is not even like Code Raid, which is your normal, like, Ice synergy, right? Like, if something's frozen, you draw a card. This is not. Like...
Yep. All right. Let's move on to the other two
Well,
classes.
okay, so it's at a 100. I just want to make sure that people know
Okay.
this is like a very usable card still. Like 2 mana, 2 damage to a minion, especially a mage, is a very usable card, and then it has some upside. So it's not like the worst card. And if it's in the 7th bucket, it's totally like draftable, I think. So this is the one card that you may actually consider drafting a significant amount of time if it is in the 7th bucket.
Yep. All right. Next, we have the rogue card, which is Pilfer, 1 mana common spell. Add a random card to your hand from your opponent's class. Typical kind of like rogue thief stuff. What's the score for this one?
The score for this one is a 100. That's more of a. That's not really. Well, partly a random class card from your opponent's class is better than what was Tome of Intellect? Like a spell?
It's a random mage spell.
A random mage spell? Okay. So a random card from your opponent's class to Rogue is better than a random mage spell, and more importantly, Rogue have a lot of good uses for small spells, right?
Yeah.
And overall, like Rogue, there's a whole bunch of factors going in there, but Rogue is going to get a bonus to this compared to Tome of Intellect. I think it's good to compare it. Like, what's hallucinate in Rogue? Because Pilfer is ending up at a 100. Hallucinate we have at a. Gotta find this. Can I find hallucinate? Hallucination is at a 123. So that's what the Discover adds to it. Because they're literally the same card. Except one
Yep.
has a Discover attached to it and one doesn't. So the Discover is worth about 23 points.
Okay. I think that's fair. All right. So that's Pilfer. Anything more you want to say about it?
Nope. Again, pickable card just because it's Rogue and it hits a combo trigger.
All right. Lastly, we have Call of the Void for Warlock. 1 mana. Once again, add a random demon to your hand. What's the score for this one?
Score for this one is 62. Because, demons are minions and they're not very good.
Yeah. Sometimes you're paying, like, you can pay for the 2 mana Flame Imp, right? Or the 2 mana
We very
Void
consistently
Walker.
hate on like demons. Like you look at like Bane of Doom, we have that very low as well. On top of all of that, like warlocks can draw cards with their hero power. I'm not sure if everyone was aware of that. But that lowers the quality of needing to draw a random card because if you ever need another option, you can have another option. So it's just all kind of working against this card.
Yeah, and they've definitely diluted the demons a little bit more recently, right? There was a time in which demons trended fairly big, and now even though we have the Void Lord, they've also made some smaller demons as well. So
Mm-hmm.
there are games in which you could definitely win slash lose just because of this card, but those are just the going to be the exceptions. All right. So these are your new cards. Not going to be super, meta changing, meta shifting, mostly because they're just not that good, and also they're just very kind of random
Mm-hmm.
cards. So you can't really play around it, right? There's not much strategy involved here, which is kind of a bad thing, right? I've talked about these cards before. I don't think, these cards are going to break the meta in any way. But once again, these are some cards in which I don't love, especially something like Pilfer, right? I've never loved the idea of a, like a priest or a rogue getting something from your class and then they have it in their hand. I'm just like, I have no idea what this card is. And suddenly they like Sunkeeper Tarum you, or the rogue like mind controls something, and I'm just like, okay, well, I couldn't play around that. So not a huge fan, but whatever. This is about as innocuous of a card change slash addition as you're gonna get.
Yeah. And they're into the basic set, so their goal is not to change the arena or to change constructed. Their goal is to introduce new players to potential mechanics, or to make new players more easily make like a demon deck or a mage spell deck or a freeze mage deck or whatever, right? That's all. And I think they do that job pretty well. They also even out the numbers. Like if you're wondering why these classes get it, it's because these classes have Hall of Fame cards that got rotated out. and or like Mage, for example, I think just always had one less card than the other people for basic cards. So they're filling in the gaps now, like 4 years after the game's release. It's about time. And it also means that they're going to make probably these kinds of like bad card substitutions in every time they move any card out of basic from now on, right? And it probably won't wait this long of a time. It probably will happen at the rotation. Now that they've kind of committed to this, like we need even numbers of basic cards for all classes. Again, it's a good design element for introducing new players in, right? But it's not about the arena. And given how these cards are designed, they're trying to be as low impact as possible to the constructed and arena scenes. Okay, so that's it for new cards. Let's go on and talk about Warrior, the number 3 class by win rate on HS Replay. Number 3 class.
Number 3 class, and it's trailing number 2 by 0.1%.
And if you know anything about how good people are at playing Warrior, you know that means the true power of the Warrior is even higher than that.
Yeah. I legit am frustrated whenever I face Warriors these days. And because they box you in so much. Anyways, why don't you get started and kind of tell us, because right now the big question is like how and why, right? It's like, what is up with this? Why is Warrior essentially tied for number 2? Like we say it's number 3, but essentially it's like tied for number 2. And for a little bit, it was even number 2, right? It seems to just be going like flipping back and forth with Rogue for number 2. So start us off. Like, how did we get here?
First things first, there's something called micro adjust. I'm sure you've heard if you listen to the Lightforge podcast. And what micro adjust do is they increase the amount of higher bucket cards that you see for classes that have lower win rates in historical metas. And Warrior has one of the highest adjusts, if not the highest adjust, by a significant margin, I think, to the other classes because they suck otherwise. Like their hero power doesn't do anything. They've historically sucked. And so Blizzard's had a huge thumb on the scale to bring them up. 2, they switched over to the bucket system, which means now when you're adjusting up, you don't just get a bunch of really good weapons you have to take that run into each other. Now you can kind of build a Warrior however you want with the right number of weapons, which is very key for Warrior. And it's all kind of come together. And then this very last expansion, one of Warrior's biggest problems from before is that the class just fundamentally had very few ways to remove multi-targets. And in Constructed, it's oftentimes a control class, but in Arena, because of the hero power, but in Arena, you can't do that. So Warriors lost like a lot of dimensions. And now it's back thanks to one card, and this is our card good bad of the day, Super Collider. You want to talk about Super Collider, Merps?
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about Super Collider. Okay, so I'm just going to say that this was a card that we were super high on since the very beginning, and we got some hate for it, right? We got some hate for it. Oh my god,
the hate on this card. This is one of those cards, though, where like after you really think, like you just sit there for like 15 minutes and really think about how this card would work in a game. And if you were still hating on it at that point, like I think we were able to talk a lot of people into this card because people had a reaction to the card and they just didn't think too deep about the card. But then the remaining percentage of people that we couldn't convince, I was like, I don't know. Like, this isn't like, yeah, there's no card that's had this mechanic before, but it's not like Echo, right? It's not like, oh, I can't even like, or like Spellstones, right? Where you have to like do something weird in your head for it. It's just an effect.
Yeah. To be fair, I think some people misunderstood the card in which they didn't exactly realize that the minion that you attacked would like actually bump into.
So it would hit both of the minions. So that like almost doubles the damage that it deals. So that's like the easy to convince people, right? Once you're like, oh, that's actually how the card works. Oh, so it deals like, 50, 75% more damage than I thought it was going to deal. Okay, fine. Right?
Yeah. So what this card does so well is it prevents an entire sort of like style of play. By style of play, I mean it prevents sort of like spread, right? Or just makes the spread so just just so bad, right? So bad because you presumably already get some decent value out of the super collider when you play it. Like it's the reason that you play on that turn, right? Because you get a good use out of it. And then you still have these two other charges. In like and what you're able to do is just say, okay, if you want to play 2 minions, if you want to play 3 minions, um, going to be it's going to be an anti-tempo move for you eventually. It's going to be an anti-value move as well because I have this weapon that negates that move. So what essentially happens is when the warrior plays super collider, you're just like, I'm good, and the only thing that this guy can do, and which Super Collider cannot deal with at all, is he plays 1 minion, and that's totally, that's a situation in which I can probably deal with, right? Like that's a situation in which all classes can kind of deal with. Even just say they drop 1 minion, I can just drop a taunt. I can just, like kind of like play it very straightforward. In today's meta, you don't worry about that 1 minion coming down and like attacking your board once, or just attacking you to the face. You worry about the varied kind of like difficult death rattly boards, and Super Collider is really really good against that. So it's good just because it's good against the boards now, and it's good just because it boxes people out in a format in which their deck is very imperfect, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's really where the power comes from. And when I've played it and I've had it played against me, you can see just the other side, just be
Oh
like,
my god.
oh gosh, like I can't really deal with this. This is just way too difficult for me to deal with. And yeah, it's one of those cards that instantly can swing a game and just from that point on, like close it out with the last two charges.
It's not like you can't play around it. You can, and then you get a pretty good read whether your opponent has it or not. So it's not like you can't interact with it in certain ways. But once it comes out, it has 3 charges. You're going to run out of options of how to play around it, like very quickly. So like there's just not much you can do after it comes out. You can prevent the first hit from being too damaging. And after that, it's just anti-tempo for you all the time because you can't play the cards that you want to play. Like the Super Collider doesn't need to hit anything to get value. It just has to like exist on the opponent's side of the board. And you have to play around it. You have to give it like credit. Like unless you're punching your opponent so hard that your opponent can't even use the Super Collider to hit your minions, that's the only time when you can like actually like kind of play past the Super Collider. So it's an insanely good card. I'm sure everyone's picking this right now. It's an insane win rate. And let's move on from describing how good this card is and talking about how you do play around a Super Collider, right? Like it's not like Warriors are unbeatable right now. We've all beaten our fair share of Warriors. And one of the key things to do is to make sure that a turn 5 Super Collider does not win the entire game, right? So there are, I'm going to say 3 ways to play around a turn 5 Super Collider. That means before you even see the Super Collider. And then we'll talk about what happens after the Super Collider comes out. So the first thing you do is you make sure going into turn 5, Super Collider can't clear your board. Kind of a weird math thing to do, but usually you'll be able to accomplish that, right? Like it takes a very specific, like you have to have exactly 2 minions on the board, and one of them, and they have to be within 1 health of each other. So just don't set that up. It's not too hard. The easiest way to prevent it is by playing like 1 large card. That'll get it done. 2, rather than not getting cleared, you can always. Sorry, I don't know what to call it. Like, is it? There's no name for it. I haven't heard anyone use a consistent name for it. Like the gap. You want to put a gap in the middle. Like try to play
Okay. You want like a nice
minions.
buffer minion.
Buffer.
Like,
Okay, so you want a
yeah,
buffer
sure.
minion between your 2 minions. So it's the same concept as Betrayal. For Betrayal, you put like a 1/1 in the middle between your 2 large minions, and then well, not a 1/1, maybe like a 1/2, and so that the dagger can't clear it, and then the Betrayal can only target the middle minion, right? So you get around that. For Super Collider, that's not what you do. You put a 1 health minion in between your 2 larger minions. So that if Super Collider wants to hit that 1 health minion, it'll kill the 1 health minion, but then the 1 health minion doesn't attack anything. So that's the gap that you want. And again, it either is going to be a totally worthless minion, like a 1/3 or something, that you don't care if that thing, deals 1 damage to one of your minions and dies, or even better, if it has exactly 1 health.
Yeah. And I would caution you guys to you have to do a bit of risk assessment these days, because what I see some people do is they put the 1/1 in between 2 big minions and just say, okay, this is good. They can't Super Collider anymore, right? When you have to do a risk assessment again and just be like, okay, well, sometimes you just really need to put like the 3/3 in the middle there and say, like, yeah, if a Super Collider comes out, let's say this is past just turn 5, right? It's like, yeah, if the Super Collider comes out, it'll hurt a little bit more, but at the same time, that 1/1 is much more easily dealt with, right? So you have to think, it's like, okay, if I have, like a 7/7, a 6/7 out there, and I'm like, okay, 1/1 in the middle, good to go. You really need to, if you want to protect those, you really need to be like, okay, I will take a bigger hit, but just to make it more resilient to this card that will just win him the game, if he's able to get it off on those 2 minions I talked about.
And the last of the 3 ways to play around Super Collider is taunt. You put a taunt, you make it big, and then you can place the taunt wherever you place it. So you can always place a smaller minion next to the taunt. So if they want to use their Super Collider, it has to go into your taunt, which is not very efficient, and they take a lot of face damage, and then it only hits one of your small minions, and only one of your small minions hits it. Like, playing around a Super Collider still means giving the Super Collider value, just not the insane value that Super Collider gets, right? Not the game-winning value the Super Collider gets. So those are your 3 ways to play around Super Collider. Try to do that if you can, and the game in your head is always like, how much tempo do I sacrifice by playing around it? And brings us to the other part about Super Collider, which is that it is really, really, really insanely easy to get a read on Super Collider. Because if your opponent has any decent ways to do to play a Super Collider, it's coming out, because they know that once the Super Collider is on the board, it will actively cause you to anti-tempo. So no one's like holding a Super Collider for something better. Like, if they could get 5 damage worth of value from a Super Collider, they're going for it. So if you give your opponent a board after turn 5 that a Super Collider would be good on, they will play it. If they don't play it, they don't have it. If they don't have it, stop playing around top deck Super Colliders. Like, Super Colliders are so anti-tempo to play around with, and so weird, that unless you're not sacrificing any tempo at all to play around the top deck Super Collider, you just don't do it. You just tempo out. And you could potentially play around other stuff with it, but like, don't like, once you get a read that your opponent doesn't have a Super Collider, don't keep playing around the Super Collider. On the other hand, once you, like, I'm gonna say bait out the Super Collider, but really it's just whichever turn that you have to give into the Super Collider, and your opponent does play the Super Collider, now you have your setup, right? And if you want to be one step ahead of the game, I know a lot of times people debate which play to make, and they all seem like, oh, you could do this or this, and it's all kind of okay. Keep cards in your hand if you haven't had a Super Collider read yet. If you haven't had a Super Collider read yet, and it's going into turn 5, or like going past turn 5, like, keep the cards in your hand that you can then use later to play around Super Colliders. Like,
yeah,
keep like your small stealth minions, keep your things with 1 health. Like, keep your giant minions that you could play like 1 the turn of, so you don't have to play 2 minions. That's a very good just general rule in playing against Warrior until you get that read. After you get that read, just send all your stuff on the board.
Yeah. Super Collider has become one of the boogeymen when you face Warriors, like when it's just like how people think of Primordial Drake, right? It's like, okay, how do we not get screwed by this really super duper powerful card when we're this ahead? You have to think about Super Collider in that way. as well. It's a card that always has, like, consistently has to be on your mind. It's like, okay, do we get screwed by Super Collider the next turn if we make this move? And you have to think about that every single turn after turn 5. Just because even if they don't have it then, it's one of those cards in which if they are able to get a good return on the Super Collider immediately, and then they still have 2 more charges and their health is like decent, you kind of just lose the game right there. So it's something in which it's not a bad idea in your decision-making tree to just kind of think about it at least a little bit every single turn.
Yep. Super Glider 154, card good bad. Okay, let's talk about the next card, the other boogeyman when facing warrior. Because one card does not make a class, right? You gotta have a lot of build up to it. And here's the card that made like Control Warrior a playable like kind of thing. And this came from Witchwood. And it is Warpath at 133. It's a 2-mana whirlwind with Echo. And
yeah,
when this card came out, it made a big splash because now all of a sudden Warriors had the one thing. You'll see this as a common theme, right? Whenever a class gets a card that does something that they shouldn't be able to do, that is one of their weaknesses, and it is a really, really good card on top of that, rather than like a weak version of a card, then that class has much fewer weaknesses. Then that class becomes a lot better. Like you saw it with like Paladin in the Keeper of Oldemon, right? Paladins have no hard removal. Wow, if you have Keeper of Oldemon, you kind of have a hard removal. You saw it with Rogue, with Dark Iron Skulker. Rogues have no board clears. Well, if you have Dark Iron Skulker, you kind of have a board clear. Now you're seeing it with Warrior, right? Warriors have no ability before this, right? They had no ability in the arena to do board clears or even like really hit 2 things. Now, all of a sudden, on top of Brawl, which was their only thing that Blizzard didn't really expand upon after that, they now have Warpath and Super Collider. And, well, class got a whole lot better. It's all like you can kind of see this coming when you put these cards into the meta.
right.
Anyway, Warpath. How do you play around it? It could potentially be a 5 damage double-sided clear, and it's not RNG. This is not Dragon's Fury. It's just kind of guaranteed to happen if you have enough mana.
So what you want to think about for Warpath is at the very basic level, just math it out, right? Just math it out. So starting on turn 4, you're like, okay, they can have a consecration. Starting on turn 6, it's like, okay, they have an Excavated Evil. For those of you who haven't played it, Excavated Evil is a 5 mana, deal 3 damage to everything on the board. That priest had. Anyways, oh my gosh. Some people might not know what that card is. And then on turn 8, they can deal 4 damage, right? So at the very, very basic level, just recognize that. It's like, okay, I'm going into turn 8. If they have a Warpath, they can deal 4 damage to everything. They have a slightly crappier Flame Strike. But is that good? Like, do they just wreck me if they have that? Are they taking like 3 cards off the board with just their 1 card? So these are like that is the question that you have to ask first of all, and then kind of their future considerations to be had. But make sure you do that. That's it. Just check every single turn and be like, okay, what can they do next turn, and does that matter?
Yeah. And if you're looking to like play stuff, like if you're in danger of overextending, play stuff with higher health. Play stuff that that doesn't get killed by it. Because the thing with Warpath is your Death Rattles and your Divine Shields don't cover for you anymore. You have much fewer like ability to stay on the board. And if the warrior seems like they're just hero powering and not doing much, don't play into it. There's not a lot that a warrior has that will make them do moves like that. And all of them just clear your whole board. You don't care if it's a Brawl or a Warpath or like, just if they're skipping mana, you can skip the same amount of mana and still keep up. Like if the Warpath at like let's say 8 mana, right, or like 10 mana is killing 2 of your minions that are like mid-size, that's fine. It's a good card. It's reactive, right? Let them have it. If it's killing 3 of your minions, like if it's taking away, if they spend 10 mana and they take away like 20 tempo worth of stats, you're kind of screwed. You don't want them to be able to like make giant swings like that. So just don't like super play into it. Keep an eye out if your opponent's acting suspicious. Um, this is really all the Warriors have. Their other cards didn't get like too much better or anything. So if they're off the board, it's not like they have like a million different ways to come back onto the board. They just have Super Collider and Warpath, and then Brawl also, right? And Warpath and Brawl are kind of similar. Um, so like you can play around it. Like just don't be afraid to anti-tempo against the warrior. And also don't like just purely anti-tempo, because the only way this works is if the warrior anti-tempo is 4 mana and you anti-tempo 5 mana, you're still losing a mana. If the warrior is anti-tempo a 4 or 5 mana by not using those mana, you got to anti-tempo as well, but don't anti-tempo like the whole thing, right? Like if you have 8 mana, like try to use some. Like I don't care, draw some cards, do whatever, right? Like if the warrior's committing an extra card onto the board, but like just one card, and then using the other mana to like heal or like draw cards or do whatever else, do the same thing, right? Take his card, play one of your cards, which expands your board, and then do other stuff with your mana if you can. It's like warriors have gotten to be the mind games class in this expansion, and that's really not where I like my classes, which is why you haven't seen me play a lot of warrior in this expansion, even though it is like a really good class right now. In the same way, you don't see me play that much warlock, is because I don't like that dimension of the class. It's very risky. It has lower win rates on average by top players. This is proven statistically when you look at how metas shift and what is in the meta. And right now we're in a fundamentals meta where you have classes like Rogue and Druid that just guarantees you really high win rates on average. Like there's not a lot of need to play more risky classes. But if you do like that play style, or if you just want to play Warrior, they're very good right now compared to where Warrior has been historically. It is very well set up for a control style. Like Priest used to be very good at control style because they could heal a lot. Warlock is still very good for control style because they can heal a lot. Warriors are insane for control style because now their hero power actually works, right? It's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Especially for something like Super Collider, in which you're going to have to be hitting quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be hitting quite a few times. You probably have other weapons as well, like perhaps a woodcutter's axe. So you're going to be taking a decent amount of damage.
Yeah.
But if you can just hang on and then recoup some health from your hero power, but those weapons will get you with an insane amount of value.
Yeah. And looking at Warrior, you can look at the other side, which is the normal, like, the normal have your 2-drops and then have some weapons, go, try to get your opponents low, go face with your weapons in the end, they can't get board control in the beginning, and that's fine, but it doesn't really work, like, too well, because it's not, like, your consistency in the draft for that is still low when it comes to your 2-drops. Your consistency for your weapons is okay, but not like anything spectacular. And just the overall quality of your cards is not there compared to the other top classes. Like, don't think, oh, Warrior's number 3, I could play a Warrior the way I would play like a token Druid, because that's kind of how you used to play Warrior. No, like Giggling Inventor is still going to destroy you. Like, this is not a friendly meta for a Warrior playstyle that is more aggressive and on the board. It's not terrible, it's okay, but it really, really is favoring that control playstyle. And
I mean, just look at the most common cards for Warriors according to HS Replay, right? Warpath is by far number 1, and it is
Warpath, by the way, is in like the 4th bucket or something. Super Collider's in the 1st bucket, so like, yeah, you take it, but you know what you're giving up. Warpath is like, yes, just take it. If you're playing control deck, just take all the Warpaths.
Right. So I mean, just look at the top 4 cards for Warrior, and then like you have a self-built sort of like control deck already, right? Warpath is number 1, Execute is number 2, Tar Lord is number 3, and Super Collider is number 4. That's what you need, right? You need AoE, you need large removal, you need taunts to protect your face, and also just like big stuff, right? And you have Super Collider. So that's it. Those are the top 4 most common cards found in Warrior deck these days. And it's not a huge surprise that sort of this control style works because of all of these tools they have. The initiative, right? 3 of these are cards that have initiative, and 1 is a huge taunt that protects their face, protects the warrior's health. And in a meta in which removal is harder and harder to remove, Tarlord has actually become pretty good. In previous metas, I was really down on Tarlord because I'm like, it just gets removed. I can't really use it to attack, to initiate. But in this meta, in which number one, you can't just wait around and play around the Tarlord and say, okay, for the next 2 turns, we're going to be at sort of a standstill. Because if you do that, Warrior is going to have so many ways to just wreck your board, to destroy you. But if you just give it the full credit, the Warrior is dropping a 7 mana 5/11 taunt, and I just had to deal with it so many times. And I can't hit their face, and they get an extremely good minion for 7 mana. So yeah, all of this combined, like just look at the top 4 cards, and you can see, okay, this is not only a viable strategy, it's extremely powerful in this meta because they have ways to clear complicated boards, complicated small boards, and then they follow it up by protecting themselves when you want to pressure their face.
Yep. And I would once again caution drafting a warrior because this control playstyle versus a non-functional control playstyle is like a huge loss in your win rate if you're normally a good player, right? Because how many cards support this control playstyle? Like really support it? Super Collider, Warpath, Brawl. Like Tarlord is not going to do anything by itself, right? It's just going to make sure you don't die for a little bit. Like it's you need something else to actually like kill the minions. And if you don't get these cards, and of these cards, Super Collider is epic. I'm pretty sure, right? Brawl is definitely epic. Like you're not seeing them as often as like these are not like, oh, I'm gonna get 18 blizzards like from back in the day, right? So it's, if you get them, go for it. But if you're going for it, like if you have 1 Super Collider early on and you're like, yeah, I'm going for it, or like 1 Warpath, and then you end up with like 2 of these, well, now you have like kind of a mediocre like mid-range kind of deck, and you gotta scrape for your wins in that scenario, using kind of like the worst thing to be playing in this meta, right?
Yeah.
So like don't let the win rate fool you. It's a very polarized win rate. It's very good for getting 12 wins. It's very good when you get your cards. But compared to, let's say, Warlock, when you miss harder. You miss much harder. And it's similar, right? Warlock also has a lot of like board cleary control cards and also a more aggressive thing. But Warlocks have more control cards, so you're more likely to get them. And Warlocks get hero power to get more cards. So if you are playing, like if you're forced to play a more mid-rangey game, you get one of your control cards that you can't play because you're the one on the board, well, all you do is lose 2 tempo and 2 health. For Warrior, you lose a card. And that matters, especially because you're already slow. All right.
Yep.
So that's Warrior. Let's yeah. We are so normally now we do like question from the GOAT, which is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/grinning-goat. We love you guys. But today, the Lightforge podcast has an actual sponsor that is not like a sponsor of the Grinning Goat in generally or anything. We got contacted and full. So 2 things. One is this is the following message is a sponsored message. 2 is we like that it's a sponsored message because we would have done this anyway, even if they didn't pay us. So it's very nice to get paid for something we're gonna do anyway, and that is Magic the Gathering. Wizards of the Coast wants to get a message out to all you guys in case you're listening and you haven't heard. What have you been doing this past week? Because they've been everywhere. And we were also invited to the streamer showdown for MTGA, the new set Ravenica preview a couple of days ago, but we weren't streaming that day, and so we didn't want to set the whole thing up. And really, we would have embarrassed both of us to go up against people who actually know how to play MTG very well, to do like a draft for MTG, because we're like, I haven't played MTG in so long until this summer, and I played the closed beta. So okay, you know what? Back up fully. Magic the Gathering is a card game. If you have never heard of it, I really don't think anyone has never heard of it, because it is the forerunner, it's the creator, it's the OG original of all of these card games that have like stuff with a mana cost and an attack and a health and they hit each other. It's from like 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, and it's a physical card game where they printed the actual cards. I think a lot of us grew up playing Magic the Gathering. I certainly have my collections at home. And
I played it. I still have some cards. You played it a lot more than I did, but we both played it when we were very young. Yeah. And then you kind of kept at it for a little bit. And I remember you played like MTGO for a little bit, while I just transitioned to other stuff.
Yeah, like I stopped playing in like college, and then in grad school, I got bored and I was like connected with like an old friend Kyle, and he was like, "Yeah, try MTGO. It's like nice and whatever." And so I was on MTGO, which is Magic the Gathering Online, where they basically like, it's just all your cards online. But the client, like, it's still alive right now, so you can go check it out. The client looked like very clunky. It looked like it was like running on Windows 3.1 or and it functioned very well, but it was nothing more than just like a functional online representation of the game. And I played a crap ton of hours on that, and I really got back into it. And then only until Hearthstone did I like, I still probably have like hundreds of dollars of cards like in MTGO that I need to go find and sell or something. But yeah, but now Magic the Gathering is creating a definitive online version that kind of follows like a more modern version of how like cards are collected, and that is that these cards are on your account. They don't have the physical counterpart to it, and you can earn them for free. So Magic the Gathering Arena is technically free to play. Now, there may be some grinding involved, because remember, these are cards that like are normally worth like a lot of like real life money, in the way the system had previously done it, right? Like cards go up to like hundreds of like, you know, $100-something, and you can have 4 copies of it in your deck. So they redid the entire economy so that you can still buy packs, but it's also entirely free to play if you want to do it that way. And that's quite an accomplishment. And in addition to that, I think what will really like matter to Hearthstone players is it just flows so smoothly. Magic the Gathering is a game that is like, I want to say 100 times more complicated than Hearthstone. Like at its most complicated, maybe 200. And to have all of these rules work together in a pretty seamless fashion on this system, especially having seen what they were doing with Magic the Gathering Online before this, is quite amazing. And I got a code for closed beta, and I really like played it like nonstop for like a few weeks over the summer when I should have been doing other stuff. And it's definitely very addictive. And if you have like dropped Magic at some point, it's a great way to get back into Magic, or just to check it out. Like, I think Magic is such an influence on Hearthstone, and such an influence on the like card community. Like, I don't know what to call it. Like, it's not always trading cards, just the card gaming community, that even Blizzard would be like, yeah, go try out Magic the Gathering Arena when it comes out. It's good as a comparison point. It's a great game if you get into it, if you're looking for something with more depth. And one thing I've always really liked about it is they have a high level of support for the limited formats. Most Magic the Gathering players are limited players, not constructed players, which is a huge departure from Hearthstone. And it's something that, like, you know, obviously we feel very, very close to.
Yeah, and that's something in which, so for me, my experience with MTG kind of ended after high school, essentially, and maybe even a little bit before then. But right, this is always the card game that, I don't know, every other card game has to kind of compare itself to, just because it was the pioneer and it did all of this stuff. But that was one of the things in which it always interested me, like the fact that you have these drafts, right? And the drafts in MTG always seemed more fun than drafting in Hearthstone, in which I understand why it's necessary to have a draft like, the way you have it in Hearthstone, just because you need to be able to play faster. You need to be able to play in a more solitary fashion. But that was always the thing that, when you and Kyle played, it was really cool, right? You open up packs, you take order. There's a certain order that you get to draft cards, and just maybe it's just me, and I like to opening up packs, as I think everyone like inherently does. But that aspect of the game was always more interesting, and I am very envious of the MTG community's sort of like support of their limited formats, which is something that you know in Hearthstone, Arena is always the black sheep, right? Like the far black sheep. Even though they don't have that many modes, it's just constructed Arena and Tavern Brawl, which is like, hey, flavor of the week kind of thing. So that is something I'm like really super jealous of.
Yeah.
And if you guys are interested in limited formats, this is something which you could dig in and get and find a deeper kind of more robust community. I think
it's open beta right now, and what open beta, I don't know if it means they're going to wipe later or not wipe, but if they do, and they've done this in closed beta too, if you spend any money on it, you get all your money like back in terms of credits that you can spend on the real game whenever it comes out. But open beta has all the cards in standard mode, all available. And I don't know if they're still doing this, but at least in closed beta, you got to try out some of their pre-constructed decks, which is a great introduction to MTG. So you're not kind of just like set adrift into a world where like MTG, like just to give you an idea, right? Hearthstone has what, like 130 cards per set and 3 sets per year. MTG has 300 something cards per set and 4 sets per year. They also don't have a class system, they have a color system, which means you kind of create your own class by splashing different colors of resources into your card pool. So you can like literally any deck can play any card if you add the resources that you need to play that card. So that is like a whole ton of more cards than Hearthstone supports. And Magic the Gathering refreshes their core, which is basically their version of the basic / classic set that Hearthstone has. And they refresh that every year. And I don't know, I feel like a whole bunch of cards get changed there too. So it's a very well supported game with a lot of depth that Hearthstone frankly doesn't have. And what it sacrifices in that is that it is more difficult to play, and it is you have to like understand a lot of like how stacks work and how turns work and what each of the phases are. Not when you first start out, but when you get to the next level, right? Like that's a lot of what it is. Like to understand how some of the combos work, it takes like a little bit like more like studying. Whereas Hearthstone, it's kind of like, oh, it does this, oh, it does that, oh, you play these 2 cards. Like everything's kind of relatively simple. I think if you want to see what the differences are between MTG and Hearthstone, you kind of have to look backwards, right? And I found this very interesting because Hearthstone developed after MTG. So we're talking starting from Hearthstone and looking at what MTG is different from Hearthstone. And that's very, very backward. Because Hearthstone dev team literally like looked at MTG a ton and say, how are we going to do things differently? How are we going to make our game different and support our goals that are, not necessarily Magic the Gathering goals, and to make a different kind of game. And the three key differences Hearthstone has made in terms of the actual gameplay, not in terms of the economics of how to get the cards and whatever, or like the formats, is one, in Magic the Gathering, you can take turns on your opponent's turn. Like, you can do actions on your opponent's turn. So opponents will play a card that sometimes say, like, at its very basic, it says like, deal 5 damage to an enemy creature unless your opponent discards a card. And then if you were playing against that player, you would get a little pop-up that's like, what do you want to do? You want to discard a card, or you want to just take the 5 damage to wherever this person's targeting it? And you have to respond. And so there's a timer going on for all these things. So you have to always be engaged in the game. Like, when the opponent is playing, you're also playing. You don't get to like just like chill out for like 3 minutes while your opponent takes their turn. And it also means you can interact with your opponent. Like, there's stuff in Magic the Gathering called counterspells, where if your opponent tries to play a card, you see it, you can then use your resources at that point, use your mana at that point, play a card from your hand that's called an instant, and instants can be played on your opponent's turn, and say, no, I counter that spell, for example. or some cards have like flash, which means you can play it on your opponent's turn. So it's a minion, but you can play it on your opponent's turn and put it onto the board. And this ties in nicely with the other part that Hearthstone went away from MTG, which is MTG is defense chooses. All offense can say is I'm attacking you, and then defense says this is how I'm going to make my minions defend against your minions. So if you attack me with a 3/3, I could be like, oh, I have a 2/2. I'm not going to block that. Just like I'm going to take the damage to my face, and I'm going to keep my 2/2 alive. And there's also way more complicated rules because you could have like 2 cards blocking 1 card. At the end of every turn, all your minions heal up again. So it gets more complicated, but it means you're always doing things even on your opponent's turn. Now, Hearthstone got rid of all that for, I think, a good reason, but it may or may not be a reason that's applicable to you. Hearthstone got rid of all that to be easier. Like, everything's a lot easier in Hearthstone because you can just like attack wherever you want. Your opponent can't do anything. And it's your opponent's turn. You can go grab a sandwich or whatever that you want, but it's a fundamentally different game, right? Like when you make that change.
And you can see that these 2 decisions have created like it's been good for the games in different ways. So for MTG, because a lot of crazy stuff is capable of happening, right? Like Adukta talked about the complexity. You need sort of a defender chooses, right? Because of with all the crazy stuff that happens, you need an extra layer of kind of protection, an extra layer of flexibility to give to defenders in order, to keep on pumping out all of these like crazy combos and all of this stuff. But then again, for MTG, this ability to respond and this this necessity for a player to keep on being engaged, it's one of the things in which some people don't like that, right? Some people are not a huge fan of that, but on the flip side for Hearthstone, we see that this simplicity has caused them a lot of problems, right? And this is one of the reasons that charge is such a big deal. Yeah. And so now we can't have cool combos, like Patron Warrior and everything. Like something Patron Warrior-esque might have been totally fine in the MTG format, in which you could just play instance, counter what they do, defend in certain ways. Like you want to attack your patron in, and they say no, I'm not gonna block with like my 1/2, right? So that the patron spawns again. I'm blocking with this 4/4, so your patron just dies. So it's been easier for Hearthstone, and it's been a smoother experience. But once again, it does take away a lot of the crazy fun things that Hearthstone can possibly offer because of the uninhibited nature of attacker chooses.
Yeah. And Magic the Gathering also, if you care about, and we're a deep strategy arena podcast, but if you care about lore and stuff like that, oh god, like you think Warcraft has a lot of lore, MTG lore goes so freaking deep. If you want to dig into that, they have like a ton of books and like all the it's a very well set up world. They have like a lot of heroes, a lot of characters, like everything is, you can follow a lot of stuff. And it's pretty interesting. I've definitely read my fair share of MTG books back in the day when I was dorking out from the East Brunswick Public Library collection. Anyway, that's MTG, and we haven't even scratched the surface really of the differences between MTG and Hearthstone. Just like you'll start feeling it out if once you start playing MTGA. Like I think it's Magic the Gathering, right? Like this is not small indie company, right? Where it's like, come on, please support them, they're diversifying the field. This is like
I think Wizards of the Coast is doing okay for themselves.
Like this is like huge major release thing. Like MTG is going to be a huge player in the digital trading card market or whatever. I guess they're not trading because you can't trade them because they've adopted the model that Hearthstone's using when it comes to like how digital cards work. If you're wondering what the difference is between MTG Arena and MTG Online, which is their other online offering, is MTG Online, like you can trade cards, like they're just as if they're physical cards, but they have a code and they're online. And if you collect a full collection of any like set, you can actually like click a button and Wizards of the Coast will send you a physical full set. Like, so the idea behind that is like, oh, you just get to play with your cards online. That's the idea. MTGA, the idea is this is a digital card game. It's like Hearthstone. You could dust stuff. They have a nice thing where sometimes you can get a card. Quite frequently, you can get a card that's like a wild card, and then you can exchange it one time, right, for any card of the same rarity to help you complete your collection. But yeah, but otherwise you can like dust stuff, and then after you dust stuff, you can create like you can exchange your dust for cards. And by dusting, I mean like gold. I think is what they call their currency. You can still buy packs. Like it's much more Hearthstone like in its economy. So that's one of the major differences between the two. In addition to the like hugely streamlined thing, like I have 0% doubt that Magic the Gathering Arena will become a huge player, and will remain a huge player in the card game space online, because the only thing that was holding it back was this like usability and playability thing. Because frankly, Magic the Gathering Online is very not pretty to look at and very difficult to follow. Magic the Gathering Arena is much, much, much prettier to look at, super modern looking. And it's still a little difficult to follow, but that's just because Magic is a difficult game. But if you know Magic the Gathering, then it becomes very easy to follow because you know what to kind of expect and how stacks work and things like that. So that's Magic the Gathering. You'll hear us talk more about it in next week's podcast. We have 2 sponsored podcasts, so we'll talk more about that. Some like. Here's the thing with knowing another trading card, like another card game, like any other one really doesn't necessarily have to be Magic. Is it makes you very much more aware of where the design space in Hearthstone is and what they're trying to do and where potential like things are happening, like how to potentially take advantage of a certain resource imbalance or a certain critical point in a game, because you would recognize that like in this other card game they wouldn't allow you to do that, or they have specific safeguards against this kind of thing, whereas in Hearthstone it doesn't. So like this is the point you exploit in Hearthstone then. So it works both ways.
Yeah, and it is interesting looking at MTG, right? It's like, wait, how do they allow that? And you're like, oh, okay, because of the way that they regulate mana, because of the way that they regulate sort of how the attack goes, just because of the way that they know how mana ramps up, right? So that's always interesting. Anyways, we'll definitely talk more about it. If you guys are interested, definitely urge you guys to check it out. You can download it for free at mtgarena.com. Yeah, check it out, guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, until next week, when we hopefully have rebuckets, which should have been done a month ago, but we'll see. If we have rebuckets, we will dig deep into the rebucketing. If not, we'll continue and talk about some of the interesting dynamics that are happening right now in the arena. And if you heard about dual classes, that's coming back. It's coming back on the 17th of October, I think. So we're not really gonna. It's gonna be fun, and we're not gonna talk about it until the week right before it. But we'll dedicate an entire Lightforge to that as well. And that's what's coming up. Until next week, this is Adwikta.
This is Burps. See you guys.